Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the debut album from Todd Terje, titled It's Album Time. Now, one of the biggest criticisms of 2014 in music as a whole is that it's been a bit of a boring year. Not that things haven't happened or great albums haven't been released. I've got lists that are bursting at the seams of great songs and albums, lists that you'll be seeing very soon, but that there haven't been truly classic records dropped or songs or events that really lit the world on fire. It's one of the reasons why there hasn't been a lot of critical consensus in terms of album picks on the year-end list that have already been released by various publications. Now, sure, there's a few recurring names there, but not a lot in common at the very top. And you know what? There is something to that argument. With few exceptions, music both in the underground and the mainstream has seemed a little bit more reserved and less willing to shock or be in your face this year in comparison with last year where there was a lot of that. Coupled with some stagnation on the pop charts, it's led to a year where not a lot has seemed to really happen or stand out. And with rare exception, the top albums, they're a little bit more subdued, not as immediately quantifiable as outright awesome. And once again, with only a few exceptions, I can agree with that. But you know what? Discussing why this is the case might be a little bit trickier. Some of it might be just a case of burnout, too much of Kanye screaming and Miley's ass in our faces, but it just exhausted people and led them to be a little bit more accepting of quieter, potentially even less interesting material. As such, I've been wary of checking out the long-awaited debut album from Todd Terje all year. He's a Norwegian DJ who's been around the electronic and disco scene for almost 10 years now, with a reputation of making what he himself has described as good, danceable elevator music. In other words, it wasn't exactly a record that was screaming out for my attention. But given some of the critical acclaim this album has received, I figured why not, and I checked it out. So, is it really album time? Honestly, it might be, because I had a lot of fun with this album, and yet I get some of the odd reception that it's gotten, most giving it a lot of critical acclaim while others are slightly more reticent. Mostly because It's Album Time is a bit of an odd slice of music, a slightly overlong, unabashedly cheesy record of disco crossed with spacey electronica, retro jazz and surf pop, and even flourishes of bossa nova. All of it makes an album that might not have the emotional heft and punch of a similarly backwards looking album like, say, Random Access Memories by Daft Punk, but it's still a uniquely fun and incredibly danceable album all the same. I gotta be honest, I really dug this. So okay, to describe how all this works, let's start with the instrumentation and the production, most of which is very bright, flashy, and broad right from the opening song, with the fluttering high progressions that will eventually blend with the thicker horns and the spacier swell. That describes the general musical tightrope that this album walks. A chintzy retro style with lush strings and horns and amazingly well-textured orchestration, where songs might evoke glossy noir vibes between blubbery splashes of effects that might have been cool for a time, decades ago, but now come across as at best kind of outdated and at worst unbelievably cheesy. And then you realize that's part of Todd Terje's point. He's mixing this album for broad tones that can be goofy as hell on their own, but thanks to the tight bass lines and lower synth riffs, they have a backbone of elastic tightness that can support them to the point where if you can kind of buy into that retro vibe, that veneer of cool can still have some real shine to it. Take the song Svensk Sauce, with the bossa nova vibe, doo-wop low backing vocals, and melody line that's half piano and half grating in-your-face retro pop girl group vocals. It could easily be played as a parody, but the tighter percussion escalation and the crescendo there, you could easily see someone taking it completely seriously and actually making it kind of awesome, which I think it is. And you know what? This album is at its best when it sticks on that tightrope. From the tight, occasionally chintzy keyboard melodies balanced against the echoing, shimmering synth lines and strings on Leisure Suit Preben, and Preben Goes to Acapulco, with the fluttering arpeggios and textured drum cadences, to the spacey disco vibe of DeLorean Dynamite, with a sick mid-song guitar line that I really liked, to the lounge piano / elevator music that interjects squealing fuzzy synth and a drum solo into Alfonso Muscadunder, or the gleaming punch and fantastically catchy progression of Inspector Norse. And you know what? That's not even touching on Oh Joy, easily my favorite song on the album, that opens up with these stark, crisp plucks before the synth crescendo begins over some African bongos and anchored by a solid piano line below the oscillating synths. And then the guitar comes in, the song just explodes with swirling energy. Fantastic song. Where this album does struggle a little bit is on songs like Strand Bar, on the two Swing Star songs. The lounge keyboards work well enough against the punchy beat, but some of the progressions do feel a little bit, well, underwhelming at points, and really could have used a little bit more of those experimental flourishes and change-ups that came elsewhere on this album. It's these moments that can feel the album feel a little bit long at points. And while I'm still nitpicking here, the wet style of production with the bubbling synths and the popping beats beats can feel a little bit lightweight across the entire mix. Yeah, it's intentional, but sometimes you get the feeling that the keyboards especially could use a little bit more of the mix depth a little bit more effectively. And you know what? That doesn't quite happen here. Still good, but they could have done better. And like most electronic albums, there aren't a lot of lyrics to really discuss, except for one song, the cover of the Robert Palmer track Johnny and Mary. It's a shockingly melancholy track to include on an album with this many comedic flourishes. A downbeat song where Johnny runs around trying to find companionship, either on the dance floor or in the bedroom trying to find some form of success, and completely ignoring Mary at home, and yet Mary doesn't leave him. Both have no reasonable feel and expectations on finding what they really want, and thus they end up stuck together. And with Brian Ferry's rasp of a voice of the album's most restrained production, it shows the other side to this record. Not so much darkness, but a real aching sadness that comes with having comedic wit and being the face of the party, but finding no real satisfaction, the underlying sadness beneath it all. Now, some would suggest that a song like this doesn't belong anywhere in an upbeat dance album, but if you look beneath the glitz and the broad strokes here, there's a certain melancholy beneath some of the songs on this album. A strange loneliness that comes from somebody wringing the most out of this brand of outdated cool for as long as he can, even though he knows it's outdated and probably won't last, or that he might be alone for the run. And you can sure that he's having a blast as much as he is, but he knows it'd be better if he could recapture that starlight for everyone and be in that spotlight. And yeah, that might be awfully poignant and even a little bit pretentious for what this album is, without considering subtext. It's an upbeat, goofy dance album. But you know what? It gives its album time a certain emotional heft to it. An old comedian battling with the audience with a joke what we've all heard a dozen times, and yet it's still a good joke that draws a lot of laughter. That's somewhat analogous to this album. It's broad, it's bright, and at points it's completely cheesy and ridiculous. I can admit that. But it shows why some of that old school style and charm really worked in the first place, and that makes this record really shine for me. I think it's great. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's a solid 8 out of 10 and definitely a strong recommendation. I'm not gonna say its album time is for everyone. It's not. And I know that I've got definitely a higher tolerance for this brand of kitsch and cheese than most people do. But you know what? If you're looking for an album that bleeds fun from every single pore, check out its album time. It's definitely for you. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums you'd like me to cover before the end of the year, or anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'd be more than happy to hear it. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.